Hello again, college football fans. It is October 25th, a Wednesday. It's Alabama's off week, so I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about some random other things. Today we're going to talk about Michigan. I mentioned in the last video when I begrudgingly put them at number 4 in my top 4 rankings that I was thinking about doing a Michigan video. Now, the cheating allegations had already come out, but not the story, not the full story. It was just, allegations were out that Michigan had been stealing signals. I didn't think anything about it. First of all, I thought to myself, I didn't even realize that was against the rules. But I thought they were talking about just normal gamesmanship in-game, trying to figure out people's signals. I know everybody does that. But then I learned the details about sending spies around the country. Alabama was actually included in that list. I saw in an article today. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to talk about the original subject that I had planned to talk about, which is Michigan. I've always considered to be the most overrated program in big-time college football history. When you think about Michigan, Michigan's the Big M. If you look at, if you go online and try to buy collegiate merchandise, Michigan is probably going to be seen before Alabama. Their fan base is huge. And that's probably the reason, the huge fan base and all the money that they generate, that they continue to get lumped in the conversation with programs like Alabama and Notre Dame and USC, Southern California, and Oklahoma and places like that. But it's just not true. Now, if we were living in the early 1900s or the late 19th century, then yes, it would be true, because Michigan really played some good ball back then in the pre-helmet or leather helmet days, along with Minnesota and Princeton and Yale. But we don't still hear about Princeton and Yale and Minnesota as being, obviously, the Ivy League schools have their own conference, and it's not in the big division, so who cares? But Minnesota, they're still in the Big Ten, and we don't hear about what a national historical big-time college football blue blood powerhouse that they are. Now, if you want to say that Michigan is a traditional Big Ten power, then yes, that's true, because they're up there with Ohio State. But Ohio State, if you look at the numbers, I think has clearly outclassed Michigan in just about every facet of the game in the last, let's say, 100 years. But if you look at a good place to start, I like to start pre-AP period, because Alabama had dominant periods before the AP era. But since the AP poll came out in 1937, Michigan has one national championship by themselves, and that's 1948. And they have one that they shared, and I was alive for that. It was in 1997. They shared a championship with Nebraska. And I think anybody that was alive back then and can remember that year and can remember those Nebraska teams would know that had they played each other, had it been, the format that it is now, where, they would have been in a playoff game or the national championship playoff, Nebraska would have wiped the floor with that team. Not to say it was a bad program. That was, aside from right now, that's the best period that I've ever seen Michigan have. Lloyd Carr was a good coach. But that's it. That's all they've got. They got 97 that they shared and wouldn't have won if they had to play the team they shared it with. And then they got 1948. So, in the last couple of years, and we'll get to that later, but they've gotten a lot of love, and I understand why, because they've been really, really beaten teams by a lot until they get into the postseason. I guess they're not sending scouts down there to TCU and Georgia a couple of years ago. And I'll talk more about that later. But, this has clearly been the best period for them, other than that Lloyd Carr era that I remember back in the late 90s. But that was my main point that I was making in the previous video about how overrated Michigan is, and I've always felt that way. Now, on to the cheating scandal. I want to start by saying I am not a person that cares about that. I'm of the school of, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Some old NASCAR guy came up with that phrase, but I've always felt that way. I'm an Alabama fan. We've been marred in this kind of stuff a couple of times in my lifetime, And I remember when the Cam Newton thing went down at Auburn, I was envious of the way they cheated, because when they bought a player, first of all, they didn't get caught, and second of all, they got a Heisman and a national championship out of it. The player we bought in 2001 or 2 or whenever that happened, first of all, we got caught. Secondly, he never even played for Alabama. I think he wound up being like second string on Memphis, and we got nothing to show for it. So I was envious of the cheating that Auburn did. They were way better at that than us. Now, the other thing that I remember in my lifetime was the Antonio Langham signing a cocktail napkin for an agent in New Orleans the night after the 1992 National Championship game, which is ridiculous, especially this day and age with NIL and all that kind of stuff. But so I don't care that he cheated, but I will say this, when it first came out, like I said earlier, I didn't think anything of it. I thought, I was like, oh God, this is another Jim Harbaugh witch hunt by the NCAA. I'm not a fan of the NCAA, but I'm also not a fan of Jim Harbaugh either. But I know that he's made enemies with them, and so I just figured witch hunt for sure. And it still may be a witch hunt. You know, one of the reasons, being an Alabama fan, knowing, you know, the level of success that we've had, especially recently and all through the college football history, the who's cheating and who's doing what has never been a thread that I really wanted to pull at too firmly. So, you know, maybe this is a thing. Maybe a lot of programs are sending spies out to videotape sidelines. You know, for the talking heads I've heard mention it, say that that's not a thing, but who knows, really. And like I said, I don't want to know. But I will say that this does explain a lot of things to me, because I don't know if I've said this in a video or not. I haven't made a lot of these videos. I just started making them again recently. But for the last couple of years, the big mystery to me, and I know that I've said this to friends of mine, the biggest mystery surrounding college football to me is, how has Michigan beaten Ohio State the way they've beaten them the last couple of years? Now, the fact that Michigan was running roughshod through the rest of the Big Ten is no surprise. I don't think that's that difficult of a thing to do if you're recruiting the right players and have the right situation going on in the Big Ten. You should be running roughshod through everybody. I mean, Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan does it all the time. They've done it, you know, they do it most years in the Big Ten. But beating Ohio State and beating them as convincingly as they have, and then turning around to go on to the playoff and look like a joke, I always thought that was very, very curious, and this might be the explanation for that. Now, I have no idea if the allegations are true. Seems like there's quite a smoking gun right now, but that's all that is, and we'll have to wait for the investigation and all that kind of stuff. But it'll be interesting to see. The most interesting thing to see will be, what are they going to look like now? Michigan, that is. Like, if they struggle with Purdue, you know, and then wind up losing to Penn State and Ohio State, then we might have our proof right there before any investigation needs to be concluded. But like I said, it's Alabama's off week. This is a big story. This is the big story in college football right now. And I had already intended on doing a Michigan video on a completely different subject, which we went over. But just an interesting time. And right now, with the off week for Alabama, I don't have a whole lot else going on. So I figured I'd fire up the old camera and give you guys some content. Maybe the algorithm will get on my side a little bit. Thanks for watching.